Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Kwe. Merci beaucoup de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Nous vous adressons aujourd'hui des territoires traditionnels des peuples Algonquin and Anishinaabe. And to that end, I'd like to add that for me, noting which traditional land I'm present on is just as much about an outward reflection of my desire to better incorporate and honor our Indigenous communities as it is a reminder to myself about the work I need to do to turn that desire into reality. My name is Ezra Michael, and I work at Defence within the Directorate for Gender Equity and Intersectional Analysis. I'm a reserve officer in the Royal Canadian Navy. I'm privileged to be the military co-chair of the Defence Team Black Employee Network, and today I'm honored to be your Master of Ceremony for this very special event. We are here today to present the Defence Team members and to Canadians insight into the work of the Minister's Advisory Panel on Systemic Racism and Discrimination. The Minister's Advisory Panel was stood up in December 2020 as part of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces' recent efforts to address discrimination and prejudice that exists within our institutions. In developing their final report, the Minister's Advisory Panel examined the root causes of systemic racism and discrimination. The report subsequently identified actions and recommendations which aim to remove systemic barriers from our institution and provide a foundation by which the organization can build on our vision of a more inclusive defense team. Now, while work has already begun within the department to address some of the inequities that are known to exist, the road ahead of us will not be easy. It will require transformational change and will demand that we rethink and reorder our priorities to ensure that we build a system that represents our future in a way that is undiminished by the errors of our past. And when it comes to the approach and ambition of defense team leadership, they know that being included is one thing, but truly being welcomed within an organization is so much better. And on that note, I will invite Knowledge Keeper Monique Menach of Barrier Lake to begin today's event with a traditional welcoming ceremony. Monique?
Pajashik, welcome. Welcome to unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. Monique Menach and Dishnakos, Kitikanik and Anishinaabe and Dojaba. My name is Monique Menach and I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake. And when I was invited here today, I was honored and humbled and a lot curious, because to see how this report was created and to see how it will be presented and to see how the recommendations will be followed up on is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And it reminded me of how my community dealt with welcoming, dealt with inclusion. And it reminded me of a creation story, which I'll tell you. It's not very long. So when the Creator decided to make human beings, she went to the rest of creation. And because, of course, she had made everything else first. And she went to them and she said, I'm going to make human beings, and they're going to need your help. They're not going to be able to see very well or hear very well, or they won't have fangs to speak of, or claws, or fur, or feathers. So they're going to need your help. And so the rest of creation, all the plants, the trees, the animals, the fish, the birds, they all got together to have a discussion. And, well, you know, the Creator had asked us to do this. And some of them were like, well, I don't know. They don't sound like they're going to survive very long. And they talked about it for a long time until finally they decided that they would welcome human beings. And they already understood the cycle of life, that cycle of sacrifice, how each had to sacrifice themselves for another. And so they knew that that would be extended to human beings. So they went back to creation. They went back to the mother. They went back to the Creator. And they said, okay, we're going to help these human beings. And so she made a sacred fire. And into this sacred fire, every single member of creation added a skill, a gift, an attribute. They say from the white pine, we learn about patience. They say from the wolf, we learn about family, we learn about compassion. They say from the eagle, we learn about love. And they say from lice, we learn persistence. So once every single member of creation had given in a gift, a woman and a man stepped out of the sacred fire, knowing in their hearts and in their bones and in their minds and in their souls that we would not be here without the rest of creation, and that we owed them a debt of gratitude, and that Creation didn't say, I'm only going to give the gifts to this one, or I'm only going to give the gifts to that one. The gifts were for all human beings. And if we are to respect, and if we are to honor the gifts that were given to us, then we need to do that by behaving in that way ourselves, by respecting each other, by respecting creation, and by not differentiating about where people come from or how they live, but instead welcome them in the same way that we were welcomed. So I would like to open this space with a few words to the Creator, to make this a sacred space, a safe space, a good space, a learning space. Kachimigwich Jemnado. Thank you, Creator. Thank you for the water, the plants, the trees, for the ones who fly, for the ones who swim, for the ones who crawl, for the furred, for the feathered, for the four-legged, and for the two-legged. And thank you for bringing everyone here together today with open hearts, with open minds. Help us to hear truth. Help us to see beauty. Help us to speak with kindness and with compassion. And help us all to work together for the betterment of all of our communities. Kachimigwich, 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 Kachimigwich. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monique, for helping us to open our event in the welcoming spirit which we would like to sustain. I would like to now turn to the Minister, with whom I've spoken with on the topic of racism and discrimination, and who I know to be invested and passionate about building a safe and inclusive environment within defense. I'm pleased to welcome Minister Anand and invite you, ma'am, to open the conversation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Chimikwech, Monique Manach, Knowledge Keeper, for leading our opening ceremony today and for your meaningful remarks. Thank you, Chief Petty Officer 2nd Class Patrick Stevens, for supporting the Eagle staff. And thank you, Lieutenant Navy Tesfa Michael Ezra, for offering a land acknowledgement. I, too, acknowledge that I am speaking with you from the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who have been stewards of these lands for generations. We are here today to talk about our most important resource and our top priority, the people of our Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence. Throughout this pandemic, and indeed throughout our history, they have never faltered, always answering the call of service during forest fires and floods, in long-term care homes, and on military deployments far from home, including the humanitarian deployment to Poland just 10 days ago. I thank every one of them from the bottom of my heart for their ongoing service to this country. Today's discussion is about building a better workplace for members of the Canadian Armed Forces, a workplace free from discrimination where everyone feels safe, protected, and respected. I know what it is like to be a racialized woman in a large institution and to face discrimination and systemic racism. These exclusionary practices are degrading, demeaning, and violate the dignity that everyone deserves, regardless of where they work. National Defence has officially recognized that these practices exist in the defense team. And as this report today acknowledges, these obstacles hurt our operational capacity and harm the security of our country. Comme l'indique le rapport, ces obstacles nuisent également à nos capacités opérationnelles et mettent en péril la sécurité du Canada. En décembre 2020, mon prédécesseur, le ministre Sedgwick, a créé un groupe consultatif ministériel dont la mission était claire. Formuler des recommandations à la ministre de la Défense nationale sur la façon d'éliminer le racisme systémique et la discrimination, y compris le racisme anti-autochtone et anti-noir, les préjugés sexistes, les préjugés contre la communauté LGBTQ2+, et la suprématie blanche au sein du ministère de la Défense nationale et des Forces armées canadiennes. Le groupe qui est avec moi aujourd'hui, et bienvenue aussi, consultative, a également mené des consultations et des évaluations sur l'antisémitisme et l'islamophobie, ainsi que sur la discrimination à l'égard des personnes handicapées. Après de nombreux mois de travail acharné, je peux confirmer que le panel m'a remis son rapport final et je suis très reconnaissant aux membres du panel pour leur dévouement, leur rigueur, leur engagement à construire un pays plus inclusif. Before considering this report, I would like to explicitly thank the panel members. Major General Retired Ed Fitch. There you are. Sergeant Retired Derek Montour. Major Retired Sandra Perron. And Captain Retired Dora Gibson for their observations, their recommendations, and their incredibly hard work over the past year. Our conversations have meant so much to me, and I have enjoyed getting to know you all. Now to the report. The report is divided into 3 parts. Premièrement, le rapport expose les origines et la réalité actuelle du racisme et de la discrimination systémique au Canada et au sein de l'équipe de la défense. Comme le rapport dit, pour améliorer l'avenir, il faut souvent comprendre le passé. Second, the report sets forth a series of vision principles for the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. These principles describe the qualities of a truly diverse and equitable defense team. One core principle is an institution that represents the demographic composition of this country in terms of gender, in terms of culture, and in terms of background and broader race and ethnicity. Other principles include the presence of safe places for nursing mothers, sacred spaces for peoples of all faiths, and mutual respect at all times. Ces principes serviront également d'indicateurs de succès pour montrer qu'une culture plus inclusive s'installe. And third, the report makes recommendations for change in 13 different areas, some of which include promoting the history of Black service personnel, creating a safer environment for individuals to bring forward complaints of racism, building better recruitment efforts in multicultural communities, and using data to measure our progress. The panel urges the defense team leaders to consider these recommendations with resolve and with urgency, and that is exactly what we will do. Some work is already underway. Our institution is in fact working hard on many of these goals right now. Dirigée par la lieutenante générale Jenny Carignan, notre équipe de conduite professionnelle et culture a élaboré le programme de leadership inclusif. Ce programme aide les leaders à créer des environnements dans lesquels les gens se sentent valorisés, respectés, en sécurité et impliqués dans la prise de décision. Notre équipe d'infrastructure et environnement travaille à la mise en œuvre de la Déclaration des Nations Unies sur les droits des peuples autochtones. Et notre organisation discute fréquemment avec un groupe diversifié d'employés grâce au réseau national de groupes consultatifs de la défense et d'autres initiatives telles que le réseau des employés noirs. Additionally, our civilian human resource team has launched an executive development program for diverse talent, which aims to increase Black, Indigenous, and minority representation at the executive level. We are also using detailed data and analysis reporting on incidents of hateful conduct to help focus our efforts on culture change. And this July, I will offer a formal apology to members and descendants of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. This apology will highlight the service history of Black members of the Canadian Armed Forces and encourage more Canadians to learn about their experiences. But the fact of the matter is that we need to do more, and this report will help us do just that. So what is our approach to implementing the recommendations? We are establishing a working group that will include representatives from across our organization. As well as from our 6 defense advisory groups and networks, to develop an implementation framework and action plan. Maintenant, nous mettons en place un groupe de travail qui comprendra des représentants de toute notre organisation ainsi que nos 6 groupes consultatifs afin d'un plan d'action pour mettre en œuvre ces recommendations. And how will we measure our progress? This is crucially important. This report recommends the implementation of a process to collate, to review, to help to implement previous recommendations. And we have set up the External Comprehensive Reviews Implementation Committee to do just that. In addition, our officials provide regular briefings on culture change to stakeholders and media, including 2 during the month of March alone. Going forward, I have requested that these briefings include progress reports on work underway to address racism and discrimination in DND and the Canadian Armed Forces. As we pursue this work, we will be collaborative every step of the way. To the members of the Defense Aboriginal Advisory Group, the Defense Visible Minority Advisory Group, the Defense Women's Advisory Group, the Defense Team Pride Advisory Organization, the Defense Advisory Group for Persons with Disabilities, and the Defense Team Black Employee Network, I thank you for sharing your lived experiences so that we can build a better workplace together. To conclude, je reconnais que l'éradication du racisme et de la discrimination systémique constitue un défi institutionnel majeur. Mais nous devons accomplir cette mission. Tout simplement, elle est cruciale pour nos employés, nos militaires, et donc la sécurité de notre pays. As Minister of National Defense and a racialized woman, I am strongly committed to building institutions where Canadians from all backgrounds are included, welcomed, and empowered. I will continue to work on this mission with General Eyre and Deputy Minister Matthews every single day. Encore une fois, aux 4 membres du panel, je vous remercie pour votre leadership et pour tous les efforts aussi que vous avez déployés chaque jour et dans ce rapport. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you, Minister Anand. And particularly, thank you for your commitments to transparency, accountability, and collaboration, which I know will be critical factors to our collective success. I'd like to now invite the advisory panel members to each share with us elements of their work and final report. I'd like to mention that all of our panelists have a deep understanding of the unique and complex landscape at Defense. All are former CAF members, and some are also former public servants at D&D. J'aimerais maintenant laisser la parole aux membres du groupe consultatif, en commençant en premier lieu avec Sandra Perron, suivie par Dor Gibson, Arunianos Derek Montour et Ed Finch. Sandra?
Merci, Madame la Ministre. Bonjour, good morning, Kwekwe. On behalf of the advisory panel, I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to Knowledge Keeper Manach for your words, for your presence here today, and I hope that we honor the gifts that were given to us to work on this panel. I would also like to thank CPO Stevens for sharing with us the energy of the Eagle staff. I would also like to thank Minister Sajjan for inviting us to participate in this mandate, and to Minister Anand for continuing to invest in this important work. Finally, I would like to say thank you to Shea Okarubido, who couldn't be here with us today. Thank you, Shea, to you and your entire team on the Anti-Racism Secretariat for supporting us, for being unrelentless in finding us some answers, for just sharing with us your time, your patience, and your kindness. Denise, Marie-Josée, Sherry, Ishel, the whole team, we really appreciated your support, so thank you. Tous les Canadiens et toutes les Canadiennes gagnent à ce que nos organisations nationales soient des environnements sûrs, sains et inclusifs, auxquels tous et toutes ont une chance égale de contribuer. Par conséquent, tous les niveaux de l'équipe de la Défense devraient refléter la démographie du Canada en ce qui a trait au genre, à la race, à l'origine ethnique et à l'orientation sexuelle. Pourtant, les inégalités sur le plan de la représentation persistent dans tous les domaines de l'équipe de la Défense. Le recrutement, le maintien en service et l'avancement professionnel sont sérieusement entravés par une discrimination systémique. L'écart entre la diversité du Canada et la représentation de cette diversité au sein de l'équipe de la Défense semble s'agrandir, risquant de nuire à tous les progrès réalisés en ce jour en matière d'inclusion des femmes, des Autochtones, des Noirs, des autres communautés racisées et ethniques, des personnes handicapées et des membres de la communauté LGBTQ2+. Why is this gap growing? Over the past 20 years, reports from 41 inquiries, panels, boards, climate surveys, and reviews have generated 258 recommendations to address diversity, inclusion, respect, and professional conduct in the CAF and D&D. When this advisory panel tried to identify the progress on these recommendations, it became immediately clear that many of them were poorly implemented, shelved, or even discarded. Worse yet, the advisory panel could not get a response from the defense team on the progress of many of these recommendations. This advisory panel concluded is that few of them have been carried out with diligence and discipline. Let me repeat that. 41 panels and boards, 258 recommendations that are not being tracked, measured, or taken seriously. Some of them are even simple recommendations, like exit interviews, like mentoring programs. We believe that the defense team does not need to wait for an additional external team, such as ourselves, to tell them what to do, nor do they need new recommendations to address racism and discrimination. They need to listen to their own members, take concrete actions for positive change, and they need to be held accountable and measured when they don't do what they know they should be doing to remove systemic barriers. They also need to be visionary. They should be asking themselves, what are we doing today that we are going to be ashamed of in 5, 10, or 15 years? They need to be bold and be uncomfortable and challenge every corner of this colonial system that so dishonors Indigenous peoples. Unless systemic barriers are identified and aggressively eliminated, they will continue to negatively impact operational capabilities, undermine the well-being of the defense team, and as the Minister has mentioned, put the security of Canada in peril. Le progrès se verra quand les membres de l'équipe de la défense ne se contenteront pas d'être seulement des témoins silencieux quand elle ou il constate des inégalités, des injustices ou toute forme d'abus de pouvoir. Il incombe à chaque membre de lutter activement contre le racisme, de défendre avec ardeur et conviction l'égalité des genres et s'attaquer vigoureusement aux obstacles à un environnement accessible. Nous croyons que l'équipe de la défense a toutes les compétences, le savoir-faire et le personnel nécessaires pour cheminer dans la bonne direction, si la volonté y est. I will now hand it over to my precious colleague, Dor, to tell you why the defense team cannot afford to continue its slow pace towards inclusion, diversity, accessibility, equity, and anti-racism. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Sandra. My name is D.L. Dor Gibson, as I say, Door of Opportunity. And I'm proud to be a product of loving interracial parents, which include beautiful mosaics of 4 generations. I am humbled by this opportunity to participate with these amazing panel members. Being called to serve is one thing. Being asked to provide recommendations on how to eliminate systemic racism and discrimination within the defense team, I found it a daunting task. Racism exists. Discrimination exists. I have 4 decades of lived experiences in national defense as a military and civilian member. I can testify that racism and discrimination existed during my service and continues to exist. As Sandra mentioned, unless systemic barriers are identified and aggressively eliminated, they will continue to negatively impact operational capabilities. Today's military must build upon Canada's strengths, the strength of Canadians, of diverse backgrounds, skill sets, language, and lived experiences. The defense team needs the fresh and innovative ideas to build a solid foundation for the military of tomorrow. Racism exists. Discrimination exists. As a result of Canada's colonial past and associated treatment of Indigenous, Black, and racialized people, systematic racism can be found in regulations, norms, and every corner of the defense team. It was left up to the elders and knowledge keepers to speak historical truths and teachings about Aboriginal, Inuit, and Métis history, to eliminate racist behavior and to build alliances with Indigenous nations, improve education and awareness at all levels. It is also time to remove historical references of First Nations as enemies of Canada. Listen to the voices of the Defense Aboriginal Advisory Organizations. Many Black people have experienced marginalizations, microaggressions, and overt racism on a regular basis. When Black people report racist incidents, it is often the result of unbearable accumulation of repetitive microaggressions. The absence of Black representation and meaningful strides toward leadership levels have eroded trust among Black defense team members. Improve upon mental and physical health care currently not designed for Black people. Listen to and empower the Defense Visible Minority Advisory Group. They provide advice on all racialized affected racist behavior. Women in the defense team continue to struggle for a fair, safe, and equitable employment and career progression. Listen to and empower the Defense Women's Advisory Organization. Leadership must also work with the Defense Advisory Group on persons with disabilities to better attempt defense teams' inclusive strategies. Reconsider the Canadian Armed Forces universality of service policies to identify ways of valuing the contributions of members who have been injured or maimed in service to our country. The prejudice and social stigma faced by transgender persons daily are an immense challenge that no member of defense team should have to face. Listen to and empower the defense team pride advisory organizations. The advisory panel recognizes that the defense team has recently taken steps towards eliminating racism and discrimination. They've been learning about the respect of First People of this land with acknowledgments to their legacies. Minister Anand stated she will offer a formal apology to the members and descendants of the No. 2 Construction Battalion, 9th of July in Toronto. January 2021, official standing up of the Defense Team Pride Advisory Organization. That organization, they are not recognized as an employment equity group, but the defense team has taken that lead. Thank you. December 2020, standing up the Anti-Racism Secretariat within the defense team. Those are the people that have supported us throughout our journey. These actions did not go unnoticed by the panel, the advisory panel. It is an honor at this moment in time to provide a voice for so many who have endured racism and discrimination in the Canadian Armed Forces and as federal public service employees of the Department of National Defense. I thank them for sharing their experiences, testimonies, trust, and positive influences. And now I would like to invite my colleague Derek, who will talk about time to get uncomfortable. Thank you. I'm just going to get my mask. That's okay. I got it.
Sego sewak lego. Dano wat gano warab. Aruyana sudats. Ganyaka haga dano ganawage nidewa gehko. I would like to offer my greetings to all of you. My name is Arukianos, which means the place where the sky and the earth come together, or the place where two worlds meet. My English name is Derek Montour, and I'm Ganyakahaga from the Ganawage territory. I would first like to acknowledge and thank the Creator for giving us this chance to be here together today. I'm grateful for the journey we are all on, and I feel privileged to be able to be here and be chosen to assist in helping make Canada a better place to live. I'm also grateful to be on Algonquin Anishinaabe territory and to have the honor of hearing our knowledge keeper, Monique Manach's words. As we have just heard from Dor, racism and discrimination exists in the defense team in many forms. So now what will you do about it? There was a common heart-wrenching thread that we heard throughout the interviews and conversations in the past year. It was the descriptions of the members of the defense team who are now choosing to leave the organization because the price they have to pay to persevere through the racism and discrimination that they face every day has become unbearable. The everyday loss of the contributions of these team members is what discrimination and racism is causing to the team. Only when the defense team leadership, and we mean all leaders, truly understand the aspects of their personal identity that these members must sacrifice just to become valued members of the team, are actually the very things that make the team stronger, equitable, more operational, and more versatile. It is only then that you will be on the right path to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Until this happens, both D&D and the CAF must be attentive to what its people have to say. It will probably be very uncomfortable for some of you to hear what they are saying. Change is hard. People will respond in different ways. But leaders of all levels will need to identify those people who will be catalysts for positive change. Look, some team members will leave. Some people are not willing to work towards a more inclusive society. Some team members will fight these cultural changes. Some of them have very loud voices, or they will garner the most attention, and their influence will impact your team. If these influencers cannot be educated towards a culture of inclusivity, they have no place on the team. The organization cannot risk the perpetuation of a toxic environment by those who do not see value in a more inclusive defense team. Some members of the defense team will just put up and shut up. These people don't agree with the changes, but they will resist silently. By virtue of their inaction, they will support and maintain the status quo, perpetuating an environment for defense team members, and they will be hard to identify. And finally, some defense team members will try to adapt to this new environment. These members will be awkward and clumsy, but they are the key to the defense team's success because they're motivated to do what is right. Sometimes they won't know how. They're going to make mistakes because they have been enmeshed in a discriminatory system for so long that many are blinded what they do not know. So they deserve to be coached and mentored and educated and guided in the right direction. As long as they're trying to do what is right, they deserve compassion, patience, and support. As Minister Anand so eloquently stated already, discrimination exists and you need to have the uncomfortable conversations to change it. And you need to talk together to create the vision you as the defense team want for all people in this land now called Canada. And now we're going to turn to Ed to share our conclusion with all of you. Now go on.
Cher Madame la Ministre, et chers collègues distingués, this now over a year of working with my colleagues on this advisory panel has been a huge education. I generally pass as white, but to white supremacists, I'm not white because I'm a Jew. Nevertheless, I have benefited from white and settler privilege. Now I see before me the work that I must do to compensate for what I took for granted. As the last speaker for our team, I turn now to the concluding words of our report, becoming a benchmark organization. This final report has drawn on what the advisory panel heard from witnesses, internal and external advisory groups, and key defense stakeholders about the current challenges and systemic barriers to a more inclusive organization. Our report only skims the surface of what the DAGs, the defense advisory groups and networks, have to offer in terms of wise counsel. La clé pour que la défense nationale devienne une organisation inclusive se trouve dans l'engagement de ses membres à être des êtres humains, décents, à accepter des différences et à respecter toutes les personnes présentées dans le milieu de travail. That depends on defense team members becoming more than silent bystanders when they witness inequalities, injustices, and any form of abuse of power. It's each member's duty to be actively anti-racist, to ardently champion gender equality, and to vigorously challenge the barriers to an accessible environment. Every member of the defense team has a responsibility to advocate for equity, particularly if they have benefited from underlying privilege as a result of Canada's colonial history. This group of privileged people has an additional obligation to engage in introspection and question the conditions that render their workplace more favorable to them than to their colleagues from diverse backgrounds. Le fait de ne pas examiner ces préjugés involontaires conduit à une discrimination involontaire. Ces préjugés, souvent hérités de plusieurs décennies, doivent être recherchés et éliminés rigoureusement. Only then can every element of the defense team workplace be a welcoming environment where all its members can thrive. Most importantly, Canadians need the entire defense team to act. Merci, Madame.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists for those powerful and profound remarks and the clear passion that you bring to your work, and especially for being with us here today. Before we close, I'd also like to recognize the presence and thank the Chief of Defense Staff, General Eyre, and Deputy Minister Bill Matthews, who through their presence here today demonstrate to the defense team and to all Canadians the level of commitment and importance our senior leadership is placing in confronting and addressing systemic racism and discrimination within our organization. And with that, we conclude this part of today's event. I would like to thank all of the participants, those who helped organize and plan this event, and of course, those of you who've tuned in. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Question for Derek Montour, and then I wonder if Minister Anand can respond as well. And then I'll have a follow-up for Minister Anand. Derek, you're an Indigenous person who saw a career in the CAF, despite the fact that less than 3 in 100 people in the CAF are Indigenous people. And I wonder if you could start by telling us a little bit about why you saw for yourself, an Indigenous man, a career in the CAF. And then this is the question I'd like both of you to talk about, is you mentioned a group of people who will look at your report, recommendations, and say, I'm not doing it, they're influencers, they'll fight against it, and those are the people who have to be removed. Should they be discharged? Should they be fired? That group of CAF members who just will fight this and will fight any kind of cultural changes, he said. But Derek, I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you decided to join the CAF as an Indigenous person first.
Thank you, David, for your question. You're bringing me back in time. I was always interested in the military, and I joined right before high school. My parents didn't want to sign for me to join completely, so they said, try the reserves and go to college and see if you like it. So I joined the Royal Montreal Regiment, and I took it to like a duck to water. I enjoyed the infantry, and I wanted to go further. But some monumentous things happened in my life at that point. I was actually on a summer deployment, and it was the summer of 1990. And while I was in training, my community was surrounded by the Canadian Army. And it was the Oka crisis, as everybody's aware. And that changed my life in many ways, because it was at that point in training that team members who I was with and who I was prepared to lay down my life with, I would hear them talking about the Oka crisis. And I heard them say, I wish we'd all go in and kill all them savages. And that changed my perception of racism and discrimination and things that were going on. I ended up joining the United States Marine Corps shortly after Oka crisis happened. But I've always been dedicated to try to improve the services. I have friends that are still, actually one of my best friends had just retired from the Canadian Navy after over 20 years. So a big part of my hope is to try to help make the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence a welcoming place for anybody who wants to defend this land. And fundamentally, that was my hope, is that I could learn the skills on how to defend my people in a better way. And that's the basis of it. As far as what to do, I leave that to the defense team leadership to figure that piece out.
Thanks, David, for the question. Canadians expect that the defense team members will uphold our values at home and abroad. All members of the Canadian Armed Forces must live up to the values enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including the need for respect of the dignity of all human beings. And people who do not live up to those values have no place in our military. The reality is that systemic racism exists in our institution, and we need to root it out, and we need to eliminate it. And in fact, everywhere I go, people say they want more Canada. And to deliver that, we need to attract more people to our armed forces. And we need an armed forces that looks like Canada, that from the perspective of the demographic population of this country, we have that reflected in our Canadian Armed Forces. And we are taking steps under the leadership of General Eyre to reach our recruitment and our retention targets and to build a military that reflects the diversity of this great country. And this includes a forces-wide reconstitution program launched by the Chief of Defence Staff and a retention strategy that we will soon be launching. But we will not rest until we create a diverse, a modern, and agile defense team that is free from discriminatory practices. Thank you.
Then a follow-up for Minister Anand. As Senator Perron mentioned, the report mentions 20 years, 41 inquiries, climate surveys, reviews, 258 recommendations, and Diddly Squad is done. Haven't moved the dial one bit in the last 3 years on number of women, Indigenous, or visible minorities, pretty much. What about political accountability? Is there something a Minister of National Defense ought to be held to account for to show some progress over year, a House of Commons Defense Committee, a Senate Defense Committee? Where is the political accountability in terms of making sure that the needle moves forward? Can you provide some way to say that this, in a year's time, is not going to be one more report that just got shelved or thrown around that nobody did anything about?
Well, thank you for that question, David, and for stressing the importance of moving forward on the recommendations. I don't agree with your characterization relating to Diddly Squat, however. I will take you back to 2020 when Minister Sajjan started and formed this panel for the very purpose of ensuring that we as an institution are examining racism and systemic discrimination in the Canadian Armed Forces and the broader defense team. And I will say that, again, as I reiterated in my remarks, we are establishing a working group to address the report's recommendations and develop an implementation framework and action plan to address the very issue that you raised in your question. I also want to stress that work is already underway to implement many of the panel's recommendations, and I believe Dor mentioned this in her remarks also. For example, we have established the External Comprehensive Review Implementation Committee under the leadership of the VCDS to track and monitor previous recommendations. We are going to be working collaboratively with our 6 defense advisory groups, and we will continue to increase awareness of military service by diverse groups, including, as I said, by offering an apology to the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And importantly, and in direct relevance to your question, we will, on a quarterly basis, make sure that we are receiving data from the Chief of Military Personnel so that from a chain of command perspective, we will know and track our progress regarding incidents relating to hateful conduct. In other words, we are doubling down on the work of this panel and the broader issues of discrimination and systemic racism across the institution. And we will continue to take on board the recommendations that they are making in this report, as well as to remain committed to the underlying principle of their work that drove their work every single day, that the Canadian Armed Forces must be a place that is free from racial discrimination and discrimination of all sorts across the board. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Minister. So I see Jacques Gallant from the Toronto Star has his hand up. So Jack, over to you.
Hi, good morning. My first question, I have 2 questions for the Minister, actually. The first one is, we have recommendations in here on rooting out white supremacy in the CAF and the need for more resources and more training for that. I'm wondering, can you comment at all on anything specific that the government will do in that regard, potentially beefing up resources in tackling that issue?
Okay, thank you, Jacques. I would like to say, first of all, that all types of discrimination, including white supremacy, are issues that the panel took on board very seriously in their work. They are issues that I discussed with the panel at length, and I don't need, I think, to single out one form of racism, because we need to address it from all vantage points, from white supremacists in terms of discrimination against Indigenous peoples, in terms of discrimination against racialized individuals, etc. And so I want to, across the board, say that discrimination in all its forms is reprehensible. This is a principle that is fundamentally important every single day, regardless of the additional tasks on our to-do lists. Long as they may be, we must always remember that fundamental principle. In terms of your question relating to resources, I would like to mention that our government committed $236 million in budget 2021 for issues relating to cultural change in the Canadian Armed Forces, and $100.5 million for culture change in the military in budget 2022. These are, in other words, issues that we take extremely seriously. And as a racialized Minister of National Defense, I can assure you that I'm completely on side with the need to move forward as rapidly as possible on the recommendations that we have been presented with today, and for which I am extremely grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I just wanted to ask you about the timing of the release of the report. My understanding, unless I'm wrong, is that it was delivered to you on January 7th. So I'm just wondering why it's being released today, almost 4 months later. I understand that government, there's a lot going on, there's a lot happening in the meantime, but the government, of course, also has to juggle many issues at the same time. So I'm just wondering why we're only seeing the report now.
Thank you for the question. I will say that we have been planning the announcement today for several months, and we wanted to ensure that we reviewed the report in its entirety and we were able to provide a meaningful and a thoughtful response and a forum in which the members of the panel could all attend. And I want to thank them again for traveling from across the country to be here today. I am so honored to be part of this discussion today, and I'm honored to be able to work with the panel and the report of the panel, together with my Deputy Minister and the Chief of Defence Staff, to move forward in continued implementation of the recommendations of this report. Thank you.
Okay, great. I see Ashley Burke is next in the queue. So Ashley from CBC, over to you.
Good morning. The creation of the panel was in response to a growing number of reports on extremism in the ranks. Can one of the members of the advisory panel tell us what your findings were when it came to fighting white supremacy and other forms of ideological motivated violent extremism? What issues did you find in terms of how the military is handling this issue?
Thank you for that question, Ashley. The department, we found the department was certainly aware. The department had some knowledge, some of it, of course, classified. We didn't dip into the details, but particular groups that were noted, were mentioned to us. I think the panel's position is the defense team, Canadian Armed Forces and Department of National Defense still don't know enough about these groups, who they are, where they are, how they're affecting recruiting, how they're affecting members of the armed forces, and that it's increased effort, increased focus that's needed to completely clean out this nasty area.
For my follow-up, Mr. Anand, when it comes to extremism, will the CAF's reluctance to monitor social media accounts of hate groups be set aside? Are you going to proactively rather than passively pursue tips that CAF members are involved in illegal conduct?
I will say that we are working every day to make sure that racism, racist remarks, systemic racism is eradicated from the Canadian Armed Forces. And that will involve examining all aspects of behavior within the institution. In terms of specific issues emerging from social media, I will ask my Chief of Defence Staff, Eyre, if he has anything to add on that.
No, thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question. This is an issue in our society that worries me tremendously as we see the polarization of our society. And the question I have is, how do we keep that toxicity out of our ranks? Widespread monitoring of our members' social media, there will be some privacy issues with that. But that being said, when we receive reports from wherever it may come, we take action. The real challenge we face with many of these organizations is they tend to morph. Once they're illuminated, once the spotlight goes on them, they change their names, they change their symbols, symbology. So the challenge is staying abreast of these changes. As hate groups become mainstreamed in our society, we have to be very, very vigilant and continue to educate ourselves as to what these signs and symbols are.
Maintenant, je vais passer la parole à Mélanie Marquis de la presse.
Oui, bonjour, vous entendez. Ma première question pour Mme Anand. À la page 24 dans le rapport, on mentionne que le ministère de la Défense a refusé de fournir plusieurs informations au groupe consultatif. J'aimerais savoir si ça a été corrigé depuis, puis quelles sont les informations qui manquaient. Peut-être que c'est quelqu'un du groupe consultatif qui peut me répondre.
Merci, Mélanie. Je vais voir la page 24 aussitôt que possible encore une fois pour répondre à cette question et je peux vous téléphoner après cette conférence de presse pour le discuter. Et je ne sais pas qui, mon sous-ministre Matthews, a quelque chose à ajouter ici aussi.
Merci pour la question, Jean. Donc, j'ai juste la version anglaise et je m'attends que la page 25, c'est différent en anglais. Donc, je vais parler avec Madame la Ministre pour organiser une réponse à votre question. Mais si vous pouvez ajouter quelque chose de plus ici, peut-être on peut le faire ici.
OK, ben en fait, à la page 24, c'est écrit « Pire encore, le groupe consultatif n'a pas pu obtenir de réponse de l'équipe de la Défense sur l'avancement au chapitre de certaines recommandations. » Donc, on a refusé de fournir l'information au groupe.
Oui, bonjour Mme Marquis. Ce n'était pas une question que le département a refusé de nous donner l'information qu'on cherchait. C'était plutôt que l'information n'était pas accessible à notre panel pour être capable de faire des suivis, pour faire une évaluation des recommandations qui avaient été faites. Et donc, ça fait partie du problème. Quand on ne sait pas le progrès ou quand on ne le mesure pas, quand on ne garde pas nos gens responsables pour cette information et le progrès, ça fait partie du problème parce qu'on ne peut pas changer ce qu'on ne sait pas, et de un, et on sait ce qu'on mesure s'accomplit. Et ce n'était pas un manque de vouloir de la part de les forces ou du département, c'était plutôt que l'information n'était pas disponible.
OK, je comprends. Merci pour la précision. Ma deuxième question pour Mme Anand aussi, de façon peut-être plus générale, qu'est-ce qui est le plus urgent, le plus inquiétant d'après vous dans ce rapport-là? Puis, est-ce qu'on s'attend toujours au dépôt du rapport de Mme Arbour fin mai?
Il y a beaucoup de choses qui sont très importantes dans le rapport, bien sûr, Mélanie. Mais premièrement, le rapport décrit les origines et la réalité actuelle du racisme systémique au sein de notre équipe de défense. Et ça, c'est important parce que nous devons reconnaître que la discrimination existe ici. Donc, nous pouvons avoir des conversations pour le fixer aussi. Et maintenant, nous sommes en train de mettre sur pied un groupe de travail chargé d'examiner les recommandations aussi, pour examiner le rapport et pour élaborer un cadre de mise en œuvre et une plan d'action. Donc, c'est le processus très important d'accepter les recommandations et de mettre en œuvre un processus pour le mettre en œuvre et pour adresser ce problème systémique. Merci. Aussi à Arbour. Et il y a le rapport d'Arbour. Oui, nous allons avoir le rapport de Madame Arbour pendant le mois de mai, donc le mois prochain. Et aussi, nous devons examiner les recommandations là aussi et avoir un processus pour les mettre en œuvre aussi.
OK. Alors maintenant, je passe la parole à Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, merci de prendre vos questions. Quand on parle des groupes d'extrême droite, par exemple, au sein des forces armées, quel est le principal défi pour les identifier et les éradiquer? Et à quel point c'est une préoccupation pour Mme Perron et pour Mme Anand, à quel point c'est une préoccupation pour la sécurité nationale?
Je pense que, comme le général Eyre a mentionné plus tôt, c'est une grande préoccupation. Les groupes évoluent rapidement, ils changent de nom, ils changent de groupe Facebook. On a de la misère à les identifier. Ils se réinventent à tout bout de champ. C'est une grande préoccupation. Et une des choses qu'on a entendues de nos gens, c'est que la première ligne de défense, c'est les membres des Forces armées canadiennes et de la Défense. Et donc, il faut les écouter, il faut les former, il faut qu'ils sachent, eux et elles, comment les identifier, les rapporter, quoi faire quand ils les identifient. Et je pense que c'est une préoccupation qui prend beaucoup de place au niveau des Forces armées canadiennes. Madame la ministre?
Ah oui, bien sûr. Premièrement, absolument. C'est une préoccupation pour la sécurité nationale. Et je vais expliquer. Aucun des problèmes auxquels nous sommes confrontés ne sera réglé du jour au lendemain, mais nous devons poursuivre ce travail chaque jour. Et nous continuerons à travailler chaque jour pour créer une équipe de défense inclusive, plus diversifiée et exempte de racisme et de discrimination. Notre engagement ne faiblira pas et ce ne sera pas une tâche facile, bien sûr. Toutes les formes de discrimination, de harcèlement et aussi de préjugés raciaux sont complexes, interconnectés et systémiques, bien sûr, et s'expriment tant au niveau individuel qu'institutionnel, ce qui influence notre culture organisationnelle. Donc, nous y parviendrons. Nous allons travailler très fort, mais ça, c'est une étape aujourd'hui aussi ici, d'accepter ce rapport et de promettre de travailler fort ensemble chaque jour sur cet objectif. Merci.
Et de mieux collaborer avec les corps de police et les services de renseignement. Est-ce à dire que les forces ne sont pas équipées pour faire face à des opérations, excusez-moi l'anglicisme, de contre-intelligence ou de contre-surveillance?
Quelle est la question?
Dans le rapport, on souligne que pour enrayer les éléments motivés par l'extrémisme violent, on souligne qu'on doit faire davantage affaire avec la police et les services de renseignement. Est-ce que, pour Mme Perron et pour Mme Anand, est-ce que ça signifie que l'armée est mal outillée pour des opérations de contre-intelligence et de contre-renseignement et de contre-surveillance?
Oui, merci. C'est une question technique. Je vais passer la parole le chef d'état-major de la Défense et aussi à Mme Perron aussi. Donc, Wayne, est-ce que tu veux...
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Nous devons souvenir que le rôle, le mandat de l'Organisation de contre-intelligence est pour protéger notre force et ce n'est pas une organisation pour renforcer le mandat renforcer la loi qui concerne les organisations comme ça. C'est de protéger notre force. Mais nous devons continuer de donner assez de ressources à cette organisation, d'avoir la capacité de suivre toutes les enquêtes nécessaires.
Notre comité consultatif a eu des discussions avec plusieurs différents groupes, des groupes policiers, des groupes de sécurité, des groupes d'intelligence dans la matière d'extrémisme. Et souvent, ce qu'on attendait, c'est que les groupes ne se parlent pas autant et ne partagent pas assez d'informations sur l'identification des extrémistes et des actions et des groupes et des Facebook. Et donc, c'est pour ça qu'on a recommandé premièrement, de la formation ensemble, d'une meilleure échange d'informations et de plus de consultations entre ces différents groupes.
Okay, so that's all the time that we have left for today. So thank you to the members of the panel for joining today, many of whom came from a long ways away, and to the others who participated in today's press conference. So c'est tout le temps qu'il nous reste pour aujourd'hui. Merci d'avoir participé à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui et bonne journée.